Titanic's majestic beginning. In 1909, the construction of the RMS Titanic began in the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Northern Ireland. This grand project, commissioned by the White Star Line, aimed to create a ship that would redefine luxury and technological achievement. As workers toiled day and night, a vision was born, a vessel unlike any before it. The Titanic was not just a ship. It was an engineering marvel that would dominate the seas. It took 3 years to complete, and in that time, Titanic grew into a symbol of opulence and sophistication. The ship's massive scale would make it the largest passenger liner ever to sail, measuring a staggering 882 feet in length and towering 175 feet above the water. Titanic's design set it apart from every other ship. It was not just about size, but about grandeur. The ship's decks were a testament to luxury, offering passengers first-class accommodations that could rival the finest hotels. The grand staircase, with its domed skylight, welcomed passengers from every corner of the ship, creating a space that felt more like a palace than a mere vessel. It was equipped with state-of-the-art facilities, including a swimming pool, gymnasium, and even a Turkish bath. Second-class cabins were more luxurious than first-class on other ships, ensuring that even the less wealthy could experience a taste of elegance. The belief in Titanic's unsinkability grew stronger with each passing day. Its hull was divided into 16 watertight compartments, and many thought that if 4 of these were to flood, the ship would still remain afloat. This technological feat fostered a sense of invincibility among the ship's crew and passengers, creating a false sense of security that would have dire consequences in the years to come. The voyage of glory and arrogance. On April 10, 1912, the RMS Titanic set sail from Southampton, England, for what was meant to be a historic maiden voyage across the Atlantic. The ship's grandeur had already captured the imagination of the public, and excitement buzzed through the air as passengers boarded. Many of them were eager to experience the luxury and comfort that only the Titanic could offer. As it departed, the ship seemed to be a symbol of human achievement. As it made its way across the channel toward Cherbourg, France, and later Queenstown, Ireland, before heading across the vast expanse of the Atlantic towards New York. It was a journey that promised to be groundbreaking, filled with luxury, adventure, and a sense of invincibility. However, on the evening of April 14th, the first signs of trouble began to surface. Ice warnings flooded in from other ships in the area, alerting Titanic's crew to the presence of icebergs in their path. Yet, in what would be later seen as a grave mistake, Captain Edward Smith chose to press on at full speed, confident that Titanic's unsinkable design would protect it. Despite the warnings, the ship maintained its course, and the officers aboard were complacent, assuming nothing could go wrong. The ship plowed through the icy waters of the North Atlantic without hesitation, undeterred by the growing danger. At 11:40 p.m., disaster struck. Titanic collided with a massive iceberg, tearing a gash along its starboard side. The ship had struck the ice with such force that it began to take on water, but for a moment, no one fully understood the extent of the damage. By the time Captain Smith and the ship's architect, Thomas Andrews, inspected the wreckage, the horrifying truth became clear. The Titanic was doomed, and the unsinkable ship would soon sink. Descent into chaos. As the Titanic began to sink, chaos erupted on board. At midnight, the first lifeboats were launched, but the process was far from orderly. Passengers, many of them still unaware of the gravity of the situation, hesitated to board, while the crew struggled to enforce the women and children first policy. Lifeboats were lowered with confusion and panic, and some boats left with far fewer passengers than they could carry. The confusion was compounded by the limited number of lifeboats, only enough to carry half of the ship's population, and many passengers found themselves fighting for a place in the few boats available. The crew's inability to coordinate the evacuation led to many lifeboats leaving nearly empty, while others were overcrowded with desperate individuals trying to escape. By 1 a.m., Titanic was sinking deeper into the icy waters of the Atlantic, and the sense of impending doom was palpable. The freezing temperatures of the ocean and the dark, moonless night only intensified the fear. Water poured in at an alarming rate, and the ship's bow began to dip further beneath the surface. Panic spread quickly among passengers and crew alike. Some tried to jump into lifeboats already lowered, while others scrambled to find safety on the higher decks. For those left behind, there was a cold realization that their survival was increasingly unlikely. The ship's tragic fate seemed sealed. At 2:05 a.m., the last lifeboat was launched, and the ship was left with over 1,500 people still on board. As the Titanic's stern rose higher out of the water, many passengers were thrown into the freezing Atlantic. With nowhere left to escape, their cries filled the air as the ship's final moments approached. The Titanic's massive stern gave one last lurch before it split apart, sealing its fate. The ship plunged into the icy depths, carrying with it the hopes of a journey that would never be completed. The last moments and rescue. As the Titanic disappeared beneath the waves, the survivors who had been left behind in the icy waters faced their own battle for survival. The freezing Atlantic water numbed their bodies, and the harsh winds cut through their clothes, making every breath a struggle. Some clung desperately to lifeboats, while others swam aimlessly in the darkness, their strength slowly ebbing away. Panic, fear, and the crushing cold made it nearly impossible for many to keep fighting. For some, the hope of rescue was a distant memory, and they simply gave in to the bitter cold, sinking into the depths. Others, with every ounce of energy, struggled to stay afloat, but the chances of survival were slim. At 4:10 a.m., nearly 2 hours after Titanic sank, the RMS Carpathia, a ship that had been steaming toward the disaster site, finally arrived. Despite the dangerous waters and the freezing temperatures, the crew of the Carpathia acted quickly, pulling the few survivors they could find from the ocean. The ship had already sent out distress signals after hearing Titanic's calls for help, and now it was the last hope for those who had been left to perish in the water. The rescue was a small glimmer of light in the otherwise dark and tragic scene. But even then, the Carpathia could only save a fraction of the people who had been aboard Titanic. When the full extent of the tragedy was revealed, only 705 people had survived, while over 1,500 had perished in the freezing Atlantic. The world was left in shock as the news of Titanic's loss spread. In the years that followed, the story of the Titanic disaster became a symbol of both human hubris and the fragility of life. It was a tragedy that would forever echo through history, a cautionary tale that would be passed down for generations, ensuring that Titanic's story would never be forgotten.